Merry Christmas, everyone, from the Council of Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic Answers apologist and speaker, Trent Horn. And I am so grateful for your prayers, you listening to our episodes, recommending them to others, the reviews you all have left on iTunes, Google Play, and the support that we've received from our patrons at TrentHornPodcast.com. The generosity has been overwhelming, and I'm just very pleased and just feel very blessed to be able to share another year of the Council of Trent podcast with everyone. And since it's Christmas also, I'm in a really good mood. If you listened to Free for All Friday last week, you would know that Christmas is my favorite holiday. And for the past few years, on or around Christmas, I've read a Christmas tale on the podcast, kind of my Christmas present to you all. And that's what I want to share with you today. We'll be taking a break after the Christmas holiday and New Year's. We'll be back with new episodes here in the new year. But to send us off to end 2021, I wanted to share a Christmas story. And here's what's interesting. This was a story that popped in my mind, and I picked it up and I flipped through it, and I realized it's not strictly a Christmas story. But I feel like when I hear the story, when I think about the story, I imagine it being said at Christmas. And it's such a good story anyways. I'm going to make this an unofficial Christmas story for this year. The story is called The Weight of a Mass, A Tale of Faith by Josephine Nobiso, illustrated by Cataline Zaghetti. So the book is called The Weight of a Mass, A Tale of Faith. So it's part of a trilogy, I think, on teaching theological virtues to children. And I imagine that I don't know. I think this is a great story. And so I'm going to call it a Christmas story because I imagine it takes place in a village on a winter night around Christmas. You could add those details even if it's not in the story. I think it's really cool. So it's a great story. I would definitely recommend picking it up from a Catholic bookstore, online book retailer, by Nobiso, Nobisso is the author's name. The Weight of a Mass, A Tale of Faith. I shall now read it to you for my Christmas story for this year. So even if it's not explicitly Christmas, you can imagine it taking place around that time. So here goes. Once upon a time, a king betrothed to a queen from a faraway land consented to be married in the cathedral, even though he knew that only a handful of old women would attend the Holy Mass. It was not that his subjects wished the royal couple ill, or that they would not find their own ways of celebrating the union, but the king's people had grown cold and careless in the practice of their faith, like people who do only secular Christmas, just saying. A while before the ceremony, a ragged old widow shuffled into the kingdom's most prosperous bake shop. Subjects soaring in high spirits and decked in finery whisked past her, carrying away the finest confections and loaves of bread. The baker lifted elegant pastries and arranged them in lacy boxes, upon which he tied jaunty bows. His son, a kindly boy, guarded the royal wedding cake from children's probing fingers, all the while describing how he and his father had erected it. And so I imagine the old widow comes into the bakery, it's freezing cold outside, snow comes in the doors. That's just what I imagine in the story, to give it a Christmassy feel. Finally, it was the widow's turn in the crowded shop. For the love of God, she begged of the baker, if you will give me a crust of stale bread, I will offer my mass tonight for you. The baker's son spun on his heels to fetch the bread reserved for children who fed the royal swans, but his father growled, this woman shares the disease from which you suffer, and your mother before you. If I didn't keep you busy here, I'd find you on your knees in church with the likes of her. A hush fell over the crowd. The baker peered over the counter. You propose to hear a mass for me? He challenged the old woman. I'd rather hear the jingle of your coins. I haven't a shilling, the widow whispered. Then I haven't the bread, the baker shot back. Father, the son protested, she asked in the name of God. Then let God provide her bread, the baker exclaimed. The widow turned to leave, but the baker had not finished taunting her. Let us see how much bread I would owe you, he said. He tore a tiny corner off his finest tissue paper and read aloud as he formed two minuscule words, one mass. So he writes one mass on a little piece of paper. The baker held up the tiny piece of paper, and with a ceremonious flair, he laid the wispy scrap onto the resting tray of his brass scale. He then flicked a slice of old bread onto the other tray. He blinked, confused. The bread side had not dropped to lift the lighter paper. "Impossible," the baker exclaimed, placing a marzipan apple onto the bread side. Still, the tray holding the paper stayed down. The baker piled layered cake onto the tray, but this did not tip the scale. He stacked his best cherry-top cupcakes onto the balance, but they did not make the difference. Oh, and by the way, for those of you watching online, beautiful illustrations, very beautiful illustrations. So definitely pick up the book if you get the chance. Rushing past his son, he swept heavy, filled chocolates into a box. Still, the scale did not budge when he placed those on it too. He arranged a dozen poppy seed cakes and 2 dozen rolls onto the pile. "The paper outweighs his goods," a man exclaimed. "The Royal Council of Weights and Measures tested this scale last week," the baker protested. "Something's gone wrong with it." The baker's son lifted the tiny scrap of paper off the scale, and a gasp went up as the baked goods crashed down with a jangle. Everyone began speaking at once. "What can this mean?" they asked one another. The crowd quieted to watch as the baker emptied the heavy tray and tested the scale with all his weights, even those smaller than game pieces. The scale responded to every change, floating up and down. "The scale is correct," a woman exclaimed. "Of course it's correct," the baker bellowed. "I'm an honest man." Compelled by the event, clients rushed to the doors, calling in more witnesses from the streets. The baker addressed his son. "Pile it high. This time turn the scale around so that the trays are switched." The breads and buns, candies and cakes brought their side down with a satisfying thud. "Now," the baker said as he let the snippet of paper float down toward the new tray, "we shall see the truth." No sooner did the tissue touch the shiny brass tray than it lifted the opposite one. "But I don't understand," the baker muttered. As he ran to fetch his freshest donuts, he piled on fruit cakes and cream cakes, berry tarts and poached pears. Maybe the desserts are what remind me of Christmas in this story. I always associate Christmas with dessert. "This can't be," he cried. He plastered on plum pudding, candied fruits, almond confetti, and crushed walnuts. "The mass intention weighs more than these," the baker's son marveled. The baker was beside himself with bewilderment. He turned to his son. "Don't think I don't know that you would abandon the baking trade to become a priest," he warned. "And don't think any of this will influence me." He took a deep breath. "Bring me the royal wedding cake." As the baker's son rolled the cake's cart through the crowd, it parted, respectful lest the prized confection get damaged. On the count of 3, the baker ordered his son, "Help me to get it onto the scale. This will put an end to this nonsense." 1, 2, 3. The wedding cake teetered on top of the pile. The paper on which the baker had written the words "one mass" hadn't even fluttered. The baker and his client stood, dumbfounded. Just then the cathedral bell began tolling, the call to the royal wedding mass. The baker's son stood over the piece of paper staring at it. When he lifted it from the scale, hands surged forward to rescue the wedding cake as the things beneath it crashed down with a weighty clang. A man went out into the street and took up the Ave Maria the bells were tolling. Other clients who had intended to celebrate the royal wedding in diverse ways now filed out and processed toward the kingdom's great cathedral. One by one, they joined the masculine voice in raising the lofty hymn. The stunned baker saw that the only customer left in his shop was the old widow. He made a gesture of putting everything at her disposal. "Come every day," he told her. "You will never go hungry again." The widow smiled and tucked only a thin slice of bread into her pocket. As the baker watched his son unbutton his white apron, the father sensed that one day the boy would be exchanging it for a white collar. The baker, his son, and the widow trailed the procession to the cathedral to offer mass with their monarchs. Amidst the singing and the exclamations of wonder and joy, they're wearing scarves, by the way. I'm saying this is winter. This is Christmas. Christmas season, at least, Advent. The baker asked the old lady, "Why did you take only a slice when you could have had anything and everything in my shop?" "I was ashamed to take more," the widow told him. "Ashamed?" the baker asked. "But it was you who believed in God's power while the rest of us had grown cold." "I was ashamed," the widow explained, "because even though I have never given up going to Mass, I asked you only for a crust of stale bread in exchange for it. You see, my friend, like you, I too do not know the weight of a Mass. So it's a beautiful, wonderful book I recommend, The Weight of a Mass, A Tale of Faith by Josephine Nabiso. I highly recommend that you pick it up, even if you don't consider it a Christmas story. It's still a fitting one to have in your home. So I would definitely recommend that. And I just love it. I too, the weight of a Mass. So something to think about as we go. What is Christmas? The Christ Mass, the Mass we offer in celebration of the birth of our Savior. So a wonderful, joyous, and blessed time. So with that, I'll just say Merry Christmas, everyone, and God bless.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you want to help us produce more great content like this, be sure to click subscribe and go to TrentHornPodcast.com to become a premium subscriber. You'll help us create more videos like this and get access to bonus content and sneak peeks of our upcoming projects.